All right, welcome to part 10 of the East Asian world. Now we're going to move on to Japan and look at the rise of the Shoguns. Throughout Japanese history, there has been an emperor, even though the emperor is not always the center of power. In the early 1400s, though, the emperor was still the center of power, but it was protected by a powerful daimyo. Daimyo just means local strongman. In 1467, a war is going to break out amongst these daimyos, right, called the Onin War. The Onin War is going to mark the beginning of the shogunates, right? The imperial capital at this time was in a place called Kyoto. This is long been the historical imperial capital of Japan, right? Its military governor, or shugo, was the Ashikawa daimyo. But these other powerful daimyos are going to fight this 10-year-long war to vie for power, and in the process of doing that, the Ashikaga daimyo is going to end up being weakened and destroyed, and then of course these remaining daimyos are going to vie for filling in that power void. In the process of doing that, the emperor, at least for this time period, will be relegated to kind of a second seat behind these what we'll call shoguns. Now, out of the Onin War rose three very powerful daimyos, right, led by three powerful families. First was Oda Nobunaga. Now remember, with all of these, the first word is the last name. Okay, that's just the way Japanese names are set up. First word is the last name. So Oda Nobunaga. Next is Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And then finally is Tokugawa Ieyasu. Right? These three families will be the most powerful of the daimyos after the end of the Onin War. These more powerful daimyos are going to kind of revolutionize the Japanese system. They're going to introduce very strict house laws in their daimyos in order to maintain control. These house laws restricted what people within the daimyo could do. For example, it insisted that all laws be strictly obeyed and enforced. It upheld that they maintain Confucian ideas, that you must respect shrines and temples, that you are not allowed to take any oaths outside of the daimyo, and finally, you could not collaborate with any other daimyos. The other thing that these daimyos would do in the post-Onin War era is that they would ease trade restrictions. Anything to try and increase trade, they would do, right? For example, before the Onin War, typically your daimyo would build its castle on top of the highest strategically advantageous hill. But after the Onin War, the daimyos would build their castles down there in the plains amongst the farms or near the trade hubs, right? The daimyo of Nagasaki, for example, is actually going to give over an entire portion of their harbor to Portuguese Jesuit priests, right, and allow them to create a trading ligation there in Nagasaki, right? The Portuguese will maintain this this trade port until it would be taken over by the Dutch, right? The Jesuit priests would come in and convert many of these daimyos. Their leaders would convert to Christianity. The Japanese began to urbanize in large numbers. They began to advance technologically, and they began reverse engineering. This was something they were really good at doing. They would purchase things from Jesuit priests like guns or cannons and reverse engineer them and begin producing them themselves. Of these powerful daimyos, Oda Nobunaga is going to be the first one to at least attempt to begin to unify Japan, right? He's going to begin a series of conquests in the 1560s. He's going to, typically his tactic was to capture a neighboring daimyo, defeat them, and then marry into the family, marry somebody in his family into their family to create a connection that way, right? In 1568, he is going to capture the imperial city of Kyoto, and initially he's going to place a Ashikage, a member of the Ashikaga family who had imperial lineage, on the imperial throne. But when the Ashikaga emperor began to try and rise up against Oda Nobunaga's rule, he's going to dethrone him and pick another person with imperial lineage and place him on the throne instead. Okay. Oda Nobunaga was known to be very, very brutal if you opposed him. I mean, he's going to capture a third of Japan, including the Tokugawa daimyo, right? Which we'll talk about later, right? But one third of Japan. So, like for example, at one point, Buddhist monks at Mount Hai are going to oppose Oda Nobunaga's rule. His response in 1571 is he's going to attack them and kill every single person on the mountain in retribution for opposing his authority. I mean, it's no wonder by the time of his death in 1582 that one third of Japan is under his control. But then it'll move on. The power will shift to another one of these powerful daimyos. Now, this next leader was not the head of a daimyo initially at all. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was actually from a poor family, and he served as a saddle bearer for Oda Nobunaga, right? But he moved up in the ranks of the military and eventually became one of Nobunaga's top generals. Now, Nobunaga referred to him as top bald rat because of his lack of hair on his head, right? Now, Hideyoshi was pretty savvy as far as creating political alliances. He is going to marry into the Tokugawa family. He's going to marry a member of Tokugawa Ieyatsu's family. And so when Nobunaga died, he didn't leave an heir, right? And as a result, with the help of Ieyatsu, Toyotomi Hideyoshi managed to assume the position as the head of the Oda daimyo, right? And it becomes the Toyotomi daimyo as a result, right? He then rules it with a pretty iron fist. He's going to pass several very strict edicts. He's going to strictly enforce taxation, and he's going to also begin to snatch up any loose weapons out there in what's called the Great Sword Hunt. In 1588, he declares that only members of the samurai and, of course, military personnel are allowed to own swords, and everybody else must turn their swords in. And he sends people out to begin gathering these weapons up. Right? He also begins to crack down on Christianity in Japan, right? He sees it as a false religion. Matter of fact, he'll say, although Japan is the land of the gods, Shinkoku, right, there are persons who come here from a Christian country who expound wicked teachings. This is a very evil thing and must not be allowed, right? So he begins expelling Jesuits and even will take control of the Jesuit city of Nagasaki. Hideyoshi will also try to extend the Japanese influence off of the islands themselves and onto the mainland, right? He's going to call for, in 1591, an invasion of Korea. His reasoning was this: if he gets the daimyos all working towards a common cause of invading and conquering the Korean peninsula, then they won't be conspiring against him. So he puts together an army for the conquest of Korea and what he hopes is eventually the conquest of all of China. This seems like something we'll probably visit again. In 1592, you're going to have 158,000 Japanese troops land in Pusan on the southern end of the Korean peninsula. They'll push their way north on the Korean peninsula and will almost have the Korean peninsula completely under their control when the Ming dynasty and Chinese troops will pour over the Yalu River and begin pushing them back. This sounds like something we might be revisiting again as well, right? They're going to push them all the way back to the city of Seoul, where everything will stalemate and the lines won't move very much. In 1597, Hideyoshi will try again. He'll bring more troops, 140,000, to reinforce this invasion of the peninsula. Again, you'll have a continuing stalemate that will finally be broken in 1598 when Hideyoshi dies, and then there's no reason to continue on the campaign, and the troops will be withdrawn. Ultimately, the Ming then holding out, right? Now, the son of Hideyoshi was too young to take power at the time that Toyotomi Hideyoshi died, and so instead the power was placed under, he was named the heir, but the power actually rested in the hands of his primary regent, Tokugawa Ieyasu.